I don't know if this is going to wind up being a part 1, 2, 3, or just one whole video, but I imagine it's going to take a while. With everything going on in the world recently, as of today, the 19th of September, I thought about getting in the whole ordeal with Charlie Kirk, but that can be saved for later. As far as my testimony goes, yeah, I find it kind of strange that even before I sit there and accepted salvation from the Lord, He tends to leave little breadcrumbs throughout your life, so to speak. Just little things that I didn't know until I got older and started looking back and noticing. I guess you could say little foreshadowing events and nuances here and there. But starting at the beginning, I'll tell anybody, I'm in full agreement with Paul on if there's a chief among sinners, but I'm probably it. As far as who deserves it, I put myself like not even one step above, like on the same level as some of the worst humanity has to offer through history. I would dare say like on the same level, if there is such a thing, as like Caligula, okay? But by all rights, I shouldn't even have made it, to being born, let alone as far as I have. One little nuance thing in there is, just alright, backing up to the very beginning. When my mother had me, she was only about 26 weeks pregnant. I was born a little over 3 months early, according to what the doctors had said. So yeah, I was a preemie. I weighed just under 3 pounds, and at that particular stage, the one thing they were concerned the most about was, I didn't know this about development of babies at the time, but one of the last things that fully develops before labor is your lungs. Well, they were worried about whether or not I'd be able to breathe on my own, or whether I was going to need oxygen or a ventilator, potentially for the rest of my life. And bear in mind now, this was mid to late 80s. The infant mortality rate for preemies, especially that early, was just nuts. You tack on to that the fact that when my mom went into labor with me, her labor pains were mistaken for appendicitis. So she got rushed back. They took out her appendix. And then the very next morning, she goes into full-blown labor. And I don't remember how many hours she said it was, but long story short, when they finally figured out that it was full on labor with me and that she was having me early, it was an absolute miracle that I came out perfectly fine and able to breathe on my own. I was transferred to the NICU, and the closest one was 2 hours away at the Women's Hospital. I was breathing on my own. I could barely make a noise crying. I spent 40 days in an incubator as a precaution on oxygen, even though I was able to breathe completely on my own. And even when I was younger, I sat there and got to reading, and I thought about it. I was like, 40 days seems like a prevailing theme when I finally, as a kid, started reading the Bible. Like, it rained for 40 days during the flood. And I started noticing other little things like 40-day fasts and whatnot. So that number seems to be fairly special, at least in that context. And I was about 7 years old when I sat there and just attended church one time, and I remember sitting in the living room. I looked at my dad, and I told him, I said, I think I want to ask Jesus into my heart. And I still remember it to this day, praying that prayer. Had my arms, hands folded, praying it. Sitting there with that tan recliner. And it was like I got up, I walked over to the front door and walked and looked outside, and it was during the summer. And I knew something was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I mean, you're 7, you don't really understand. But it was like the whole world, just life and everything was new at that point. And yeah, there's been some times where I've really fallen off that narrow way by a lot. I've seen things in my life that it's like I've tried to explain to my kids. I said, look, you weren't there for some of these things. I've seen stuff that I could only sit there and classify as miracles, and been the recipient of a few of them. At 30 years old, I sit there and, got diagnosed with cancer. And at first it was, just I remember that night, bits and pieces of it. I was working night shift. Working graveyard shift. I had been for a couple years. It's one of my nights off. And I just remember watching TV. It was about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And it just hit me all of a sudden. I started feeling kind of nauseous. I was like, oh, maybe it's something I ate. And it just kept going and kept going. And I just felt worse and worse. And I was just like, the best thing for me to do, whatever it is just not sitting with my stomach right. Go in here, see if I can't just get it up. And I'll admit, I had done some horrible things in my life at that point. I ran from the Lord for years. Hadn't really been involved in church, hadn't been reading the Bible. And let's just cut it down to what it is. I was running the opposite direction. This is prior to that, and I'll get into some more of all that later. But I had really felt the call to go into missions, or I felt like that was kind of where I thought the Lord was leading me to when I was about 13, 14, 15, somewhere off in there, before high school ever ended. Well, that particular night, before I found out there was cancer, I got up, went to the bathroom, and all I remember was leaning over, looking at the toilet, just hoping it, whatever it was, would just come up. I dry heaved about 3 or 4 times. I was like, alright, it ain't happening. I remember standing up, and I turned to go walk back out of my bathroom. No sooner did I do that than I just started feeling real weak, and I was like, hey, I don't feel good, like I'm gonna pass out. I reached for the door handle, and that was the last thing I remembered. Everything went black. And I think that was kind of, somewhat his way of getting my attention at that moment. And as I'm sitting there trying to figure out, all this happens, that quick. I was like, it was weird. And the only way I can describe it is I was kind of aware I passed out. But it was like, all of a sudden, just this voice in the back of my mind was like, you're dying. Like this realization of, oh crap, I'm dying, And I was just like, look, I was like, Lord, I ain't ready to die just yet, I don't want to, not like this. Like, I've got a fairly somewhat strong will to live, but and all I remember sitting there thinking was, I was just like, I know I haven't been living right. Give me another chance. I was like, I got too much other stuff I want to sit there and do and live for. I want to live for. And no sooner than all this whole basically conversation went down, it was like I didn't get a response or nothing, but I just came to. And most people have had, that feeling of, hey, your leg falls asleep, or you cut the circulation off, or something like that. That pins and needles waking back up. Well, I came to, I had no idea how long it had been. All I knew was everything from my jaw down felt that way. And my brain's sitting there going, I'm pretty sure my heart stopped at some point. Or slowed down or something. Sorry if the camera kind of shakes every now and again. That's just, I'll get into that in a minute, but that's just kind of, I get shaky. That's after cancer the second time, but anyhow. Point being, I sat there and walked. I didn't really walk away, but I decided at one point or another I was going to sit there and live my life the way I wanted, or the way I thought was, going to be satisfactory. And I did some really horrible things. Well, describing that experience and continuing on with this. My entire body went numb, and I eventually regained feeling in just the upper half of it. My legs were still just falling straight up asleep. I couldn't walk. I had collapsed against the bathroom door, and it opened into the bathroom, so it took probably 2 or 3 minutes before I had enough strength in one arm to finally reach up and turn that door handle and barely pull it enough to get my fingers behind it and pull that door open and move my entire body weight with just one arm on the floor. And I dragged myself down the hallway, through my living room, and into my bedroom to wake my wife up. By that point, thankfully, enough circulation come back. I had just barely enough to stand up. She woke up. I was like, what's wrong? I was like, look, I don't know what's going on with me. I need to go to the hospital. Growing up, essentially farm country kid, you didn't go to the hospital unless you were absolutely dying. And for me to sit there and say, take me to the ER, she knew something was horribly, life-threateningly wrong. I was sweating from head to toe, cold, just cold sweats. I mean, just pouring sweat. You probably could have filled a 5-gallon bucket between, my bathroom and that bedroom with what just came out of me. I couldn't retain water at that point. And I finally managed to just turn around and just sit down on the edge of my bed while she was, very quickly trying to throw clothes on enough to, get the car ready, get me out to the car and all that. I thought, I was like, I think I'd feel a little bit better maybe if I just laid down, because I wasn't struggling to breathe, but it just kind of hurt. It was aching. For whatever reason, I laid down for just like a second. As soon as I laid back and laid flat, just trying to breathe, trying to relax, trying to, kind of get everything to stabilize out and figure out, mentally what's going on, what's wrong with me. At least something I could tell the doctors. About that time, anybody who's ever had a Charlie horse knows what that cramp feels like. It just grabs hold and doesn't let go. About that time, I started feeling my chest tighten up. And I was like, oh crap. I think I'm having a heart attack. And she was like, what's going on, I was like, my chest's getting tight, it's getting hard to breathe. I felt it go all the way down both my arms, but especially my left one, all the way across my chest, down into my stomach. Every muscle in my abdomen was just, cinching down. It was at that point she runs and grabs the blood pressure monitor, chucks it on me. Well, that thing does its little deal as I'm sitting here just like fighting to just inhale even the tiniest little bit of air. Well, it spits out my blood pressure and it's 80/40. And my pulse, according to that thing, is like 160 beats a minute. And she sat there and looked at that, said what it was. And I was like, look, growing up around the medical field, being trained in first aid, and combat first aid, I was like, we gotta go now. I told her, I was like, that ain't good. For reference, she was a CNA for years. Worked in a nurse home, she knew good and darn well. At that point, I did not have the strength to get up to make it to the car. So I had to call my dad. Thankfully, they only lived about 10 minutes away. Long story short, get to the ER, they checked me out. Not 2 minutes before pulling into the parking lot, that finally just starts letting go and I can breathe, more fully and everything else. They get me in there, check me out. The ER doctor's conclusion was, well, you're a little dehydrated, so we're just going to give you some electrolytes and send you home. And I tried to argue with the guy, and I was like, look, I've been dehydrated. That wasn't dehydration. I was like, I know what it feels like. I've had heat exhaustion. I know what that feels like. This was something way different. Three days later, go in for my checkup appointment with primary care. Well, because I have an issue with one eye from being, a dummy, using an angle grinder and cutting galvanized pipe. And one of the situations where in the middle of doing it, the thought crossed my mind, maybe I should wear safety glasses, and about as soon as that hits, a metal splinter just right in the eyeball. So it doesn't contract and all that and expand like it should. I didn't know it, but apparently that little dumb mistake was kind of what saved my life. Primary care doctor sat there and looked at it and thought I might have had a TBI. Decided to send me for an MRI. Like that day, thankfully. I get in there for the MRI. They did x-ray, make sure there wasn't no metal and all that. Now granted, this has been almost 8 years ago. You know it's bad when the hospital's sitting there and sends a emergency, like just priority letter to your house and is blowing up your phone as soon as they see the results of the MRI. Because I was told, get back there immediately. I got back there and I had a tumor wrapped around my carotid artery. Just squeezing it. That tumor was about the size of a kiwi. And just full on kiwi in my neck. They sent me over to ENT at the next major hospital. Cause, look, I live here in Mississippi. The local hospital, they weren't about to touch that. They're like, no, you need somebody that's good. So they sent me to Birmingham, to UAB. Which thankfully it's a research hospital, or has research portions of it. And I get over there, they schedule my surgery and all that. Finally cut the tumor out, send it off to pathology. Sample of it. Get it all out of there. I'm out of work, and they're like, well, you'll be out of work for probably about 2 weeks, maybe 3, and then, it's probably benign. Most tumors they find like that are benign, so, I had some hope with that. Well, they get back from pathology, call me back, had my follow-up appointment. And it's gonna be bad, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, either I just dodged a major bullet, or this is gonna be really bad, because the first words, and I'll never forget them. That oncologist walks in there, clipboard in hand with the results, takes one look at it, and says, you ever buy lottery tickets? He's like, because you'd have won it probably twice before I'd have guessed this. Turns out, not only did I have cancer, I had and have one of the rarest forms on planet Earth of a bone and cartilage cancer. Hush. Well, long story short, I have a case number and it's not even 4 digits long. And that's just since the 70s. I may have to ignore the spot that's on my camera. I burnt the lens somehow. And this video may go for a while, but that was part of what led to me winding up on Social Security disability, some cancer, and other things, getting hurt in the service, and yeah. I ain't getting into all that right now. But I'm probably gonna cut this into a part 2 or 3 until I eventually finish it, and maybe just trim it down some. Long story short, undergoing the radiation and chemo treatment for all of that, I reached a certain point where I just wanted to die. I wanted it to all end. And during the midst of that, it was like just this thought crossed my mind of, well, maybe that's because the Lord's trying to get my attention to be doing what He called me to do, not what I wanted to do. I mean, I've seen things I can't explain. Stuff where I've wondered if during the midst of some of those nights my eyes were playing tricks on me, or if quite possibly what I was seeing was real. And I'll be honest, I'm thankful at this point in time, that some people want to sit there and make the prayer of, Lord, let me see people like, or see things how you see them. I think there's a reason we don't, because if we did, or caught a glimpse of it, I don't think our brains could handle that, for one. Because I think He allowed me to have a glimpse into how the world actually is. At various points. And let's just leave it at, until you've seen humanoid figures just materialize out of a wall, and I'm like, I know I'm not crazy. And it walks across the room and looks at you. No eyes, no discernible features, nothing. Just a black silhouette that's darker than the dark. I was prepared to go to war and see the absolute worst that life could possibly throw at you. I had mentally prepared myself for the possibility at that time of capture or death. And I had, come to terms with that. Seeing that, however, I'm not even gonna lie, that was one of those just sheer terror moments where I was curled up like a 3-year-old in the fetal position over there, just going, God, please make that go away. I'm like, I can't comprehend it. It scares the living crap out of me. And, yeah. And that was not the first necessarily time that I'd encountered some stuff like that. Just walking into, rooms or places before, and you just feel cold. Like somebody left the air conditioner on for too long, and I mean, you can almost see your breath type of cold. Yeah. There were times like that where I was just like, alright, I don't need to be here. I mean, there have been times too where I've had certain visions. You know, I can only call them visions because, like one, I don't know. It was different than a dream or falling asleep because it was just instantaneous, just out of the blue. And stuff like that had happened before. Yeah. About as long as I could remember, really. I think a lot of those were warnings. Some of them were just things that were going to happen. But one example, I was sitting in a class for electronics. Guy next to me thought I fell asleep. I know I wasn't asleep, I wasn't even tired. From what he described, he said I was sitting there wide awake, paying attention. He looked over at me. Said next thing that he knew, basically I just fell forward and my head hit the darn desk. I know what point he was talking about because I remember the words up until that point. It was just like somebody cut a light switch off. And I was trying to figure out if I was dreaming or not. And at that point in time, I was standing back in my parents', at the end of their driveway. I saw the house. It was like I was dreaming I was back at home for a minute. It was like I sat there and just got pulled further up the driveway to where I was just standing closer to the yard. But the house didn't look quite the same. When I left, me and my dad had been doing work on it. And it was like I had seen it as it sat right then and there. As time had passed and more had been done to it. I can still tell you in detail every little thing with it. And it's like I had this extra awareness of everyone inside, what was happening, all of that. I knew that both my sisters were inside, that they were asleep. And somehow or another I knew that my mother had taken a nap. And my dad left there. Like, I was aware of where everybody was and what was going on. And I shouldn't have been anywhere near that aware of it because they were 200 plus miles away. And then I started smelling smoke. And I looked at the back. It was like I was just shifted or pivoted to look at the backyard. I saw smoke. And I saw more smoke. And then flames. And then everything on 3 different sides it was in flames. And the only thing I heard at that point, I could hear my sisters inside help, and they were screaming as they were burning alive. Now granted, at this point in time, I had not seen any of them for nearly a year since I had left. I called like that afternoon and sat there and told my parents everything about that. I told them, I said, look, within the next 3 days, something like that's going to happen. I'm letting y'all know to warn you. This was on Tuesday. I remember now. Friday, I talked to him, my typical end of the week thing. And my dad sat there and mentioned, oh, by the way, yesterday, that my mother had gone out in the backyard and started a little bonfire, just burned some paper. She went back inside after the fire had done died down, thought it was going to smolder. He had to go to town. Both my sisters were, taking a nap. Well, my mother decided she was just tired. She was going to take herself a nap. It was an off day for her. She fell asleep, and my dad said before he had gotten home, said, thankfully, for whatever reason, my cousin decided, who lives on the opposite side of the county, came over there to borrow something. Pulled up, saw the grass on fire, and went back behind the house and put it out. It was about 3 inches away from reaching the side of the house. For a little context, the siding on their house was cedar, and it had been drying for about 40 years, so it went up like a box of matches. They told him about it. He waited around at least until my dad got there later. I told him, I said, yeah, see, I told you. I said, there's been other things that were since then. One of those, I know my little sister would probably never understand how, because of things like that happening, one particular one is the only reason she's still alive. But like I said, Lord leaves little breadcrumbs and other things. I'm gonna cut this short. Just leave it at this. I don't care how far gone anybody is or thinks that they are. If you think that you've sinned so far that you can out-sin His grace, part 2 of this is where I'm going to really dive into some of the crap that I did. And some of this was just getting drugged through it even after being saved. The Holy Spirit's done worked on me hard about that. But if you think you're too far gone, trust me when I say you're not. But that's all I'm going to leave it at currently. And I don't feel like having this go on for 3 hours. But I'll make part 2 later. Y'all stay safe. You're as safe as the Lord allows you to be. You read His Word and just pay attention. Live life in repentance. Because there are prices to be paid for stuff, and I've paid some of them. Or at least paid a lesser price. That's why I done had cancer twice now. Second time, he slapped me in the back of the head to get my attention. It's left some scars. And probably permanent damage. But I'm still alive, so he ain't done yet. Y'all take care and God bless. I'll see you around for part 2.